My mama says everybody's gotta eat breakfast.
The city moves like a river around him, endless, indifferent, unstoppable. Larry Macdonald presses his back against the cold brick of the shuttered storefront, watching 10,000 shoes pass by in a single morning. Designer heels, polished Oxfords, pristine sneakers. Not one stops. Not one even slows. He's been invisible for so long. He started to believe he actually is. Larry Macdonald wasn't always a ghost. There was a time when his calloused hands built things foundations for Atlanta's luxury condos, frameworks for the towers that now cast him in perpetual shade. But 18 months ago, a scaffolding collapse shattered more than his hip. It broke his insurance coverage, his savings, his marriage, and finally, his belief that society had a safety net for men like him. Now, at 60, he sits on cardboard outside a closed cafe on Peachtree Street, watching the city he helped build rush past without a glance. His sign, homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless is half true. He served 4 years in the Army, but God's blessing seems to have an expiration date. Then one Tuesday morning in October, everything changes. A small hand appears in his peripheral vision, holding a plastic container. He looks up into the face of a 10-year-old black girl with her hair pulled into a determined puff atop her head, wearing a yellow and turquoise jacket that seems too bright for this gray world. My mama says everybody's got to eat breakfast. She says simply, "I'm Nicole. What's your name?" For the first time in months, Larry remembers he has one. Larry Macdonald's internal alarm clock had been reset by survival. For 53 a.m., and his eyes opened in the pre-dawn darkness of downtown Atlanta, his body responding to a rhythm older than consciousness. The police sweeps usually started around 5:30, flashlights cutting through the morning fog, boots heavy on pavement, voices clipped and efficient. "Move along. Can't stay here." City ordinance. As if a man could fold up his exhaustion and carry it somewhere more convenient. He sat up slowly, his hip protesting it always did, especially when the temperature dropped overnight. The scaffolding had crushed more than bone 18 months ago. It had crushed the neat architecture of his life, leaving him with a blueprint for nothing. Larry's hands, still calloused despite months of idleness, began the familiar ritual, folding his cardboard sheets, the ones he'd scavenged from behind the electronics store, arranging them carefully against the brick wall where they'd wait for nightfall. The closed cafe storefront had become his address, though the mail never came. 5:15. The city was stirring but still half asleep, delivery trucks rumbling down Peachtree Street, a few early joggers with expensive wireless earbuds blocking out the world. Larry gathered his belongings, a backpack that had once belonged to his daughter Rachel, back when she was in high school, back when he had been someone who gave gifts instead of receiving pity. Inside, one change of clothes, a razor he'd found, a toothbrush from the free clinic, a water bottle. Everything he owned fit into 16 inches of nylon. The walk to the Central Library took 20 minutes. He knew the route by heart, knew which security cameras to avoid, which alleys offered shortcuts, which business owners came out early with brooms and hostile stares. The library wouldn't open until 9, but the public restrooms in the adjacent park opened at 6. Larry had learned to time his arrival precisely early enough to beat the morning rush, late enough that the parks department had unlocked the facilities. The bathroom mirror was cracked, someone's fist-shaped impact spreading fractures across his reflection. Larry studied the fragmented man staring back, 60 years old, but looking 70, gray stubble covering hollow cheeks, eyes that had learned not to expect kindness. He washed his face with cold water, and the sliver of soap he kept wrapped in paper towels, the closest thing to dignity available for free. A younger man entered, took one look at Larry, and backed out quickly. That was the usual response. Fear or disgust, sometimes both. By 7 a.m., Larry was back at his corner. The morning commute was building, thousands of shoes passing within inches of his cardboard home. Italian leather, designer sneakers, practical flats, a river of footwear belonging to people with places to be, people who had survived their own disasters or had been lucky enough to avoid them entirely. Larry had his sign out, homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless, though he'd stopped believing in the blessing part. There had been a time when those hands folding cardboard had built things. Real things. Larry Macdonald, construction foreman, had spent 30 years raising Atlanta's skyline. The luxury condos on West Peachtree. He'd laid foundation on 3 of those buildings. The renovated historic theater downtown. He'd been part of the crew that restored the structural integrity while preserving the architectural bones. He'd been good at his work, proud of it, the kind of man who came home with concrete dust in his hair and stories about problem solving, about how they'd figured out how to reinforce a beam or navigate an unexpected complication. Then came the accident. Scaffolding failure on a high-rise project, the metal giving way with a sound like the world breaking. Larry had fallen 15 feet, his hip shattering on impact, 2 other workers falling with him. One walked away with bruises. One never walked again. Larry landed somewhere in between alive, but fundamentally broken in ways that went beyond bone. The hospital bills came first, mounting like interest on a debt to fate. His insurance covered some, but construction workers didn't get the premium plans that people in those luxury condos received. Then the complications: infection, additional surgery, physical therapy that his policy decided was elective after the 6th session. Larry had lain in a hospital bed watching his savings evaporate, watching his wife Diane's face tighten with each new bill, watching their 32-year marriage buckle under the weight of medical bankruptcy. He couldn't work, couldn't stand for more than 20 minutes without his hip seizing. The construction company offered a settlement enough to insult him, but not enough to save him. The mortgage went unpaid. 1 month became 3. The foreclosure notice came certified mail, official language describing the legal seizure of the only home Rachel had ever known. Diane had left before the eviction, her last words a mixture of exhaustion and something worse than hatred: indifference. "I can't do this anymore, Larry. I just can't." The final dignity-stripping moment had come on a Tuesday in March. The sheriff's deputy had been professional, almost apologetic, as he'd supervised the removal of Larry's belongings to the curb. Neighbors had watched from windows, curtains twitching. Everything Larry had built: 30 years of marriage, a daughter he'd coached in softball, a modest 3-bedroom with a garage where he'd restored a '67 Mustang that he'd had to sell to make a mortgage payment reduced to trash bags on the lawn, and a manila folder full of legal documents explaining why he deserved this. He'd tried the shelters. God knows he'd tried. But the night someone had stolen his shoes while he slept, the night another man had been beaten unconscious 3 cots away from him over a disagreed-upon blanket, Larry had understood something essential. The street offered a different kind of danger, but at least it was a danger you could see coming. At least outside, you could run. Now he was a statistic in some city report about homelessness, a problem that needed solving, a blight on Atlanta's carefully manicured downtown image. Business owners complained. Tourists averted their eyes. Children were hustled past him with their parents' hands covering their peripheral vision, as if poverty might be contagious through looking. The morning passed like all the others slowly, and then suddenly, time marked only by the sun's movement across the buildings, by the shift change in foot traffic. A businessman dropped a quarter without breaking stride, the coin bouncing off Larry's boot. He didn't reach for it anymore. The mathematics of humiliation didn't add up that way. Then, at 7:43 a.m. Larry had started noting the time after the 3rd day she appeared. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing a yellow and turquoise jacket that seemed too bright for the gray morning. Her hair was pulled up into a determined puff on top of her head, and she was carrying a plastic container, the kind that margarine came in, reused and washed, and filled with something that smelled impossibly good. She stopped directly in front of him, breaking the river's flow. People eddied around her, annoyed at the obstruction, but she didn't seem to notice. She was looking at Larry, actually looking at him, not through him, with dark eyes that held no pity, no fear, just a straightforward assessment. "My mama says everybody's got to eat breakfast," she announced, extending the container toward him. Larry's throat closed. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. His voice came out rough, unfamiliar. "I don't take charity from kids." The girl sat down beside him on the cardboard, her small weight barely registering. "It's not charity," she said matter-of-factly. "It's breakfast. There's a difference." She opened the container, revealing scrambled eggs and 2 pieces of toast. Steam rose in the cool morning air. Larry stared at it like it might be a hallucination. "I'm Nicole," she continued, pulling out a plastic fork from her jacket pocket. "Nicole Zamora. I'm in 5th grade at Martin Luther King Elementary. My teacher is Ms. Rodriguez, and she's pretty nice except she gives too much math homework." "What's your name?" The question hit him like a physical thing. His name. When had someone last asked him that? Larry, he managed. Larry Macdonald. Nice to meet you, Mr. Larry. She pushed the container closer. You should eat it while it's warm. My mama makes really good eggs. She puts a little milk in them. That's the secret. Nicole talked while he sat frozen, unable to process this small disruption to his isolation. She told him about her cat, Sandwich, who was orange and had 6 toes on one paw. She described the book her class was reading about a boy who lived in a museum. She mentioned that her favorite color used to be purple, but now it was yellow because it was more optimistic. She never once asked Larry why he was sitting on cardboard, where he lived, what had happened to him. She just talked, filling the silence with the ordinary details of her life, as if they were neighbors chatting over a fence instead of a homeless man and a child on a downtown sidewalk. A school bell chimed somewhere in the distance. Nicole stood, brushing off her pants. That's the 5-minute warning. I gotta go, or I'll be late, and Ms. Rodriguez makes you miss recess if you're late 3 times. I already got 2 tardies this month. She walked 5 steps, then turned back. I come this way every morning. Same time. See you tomorrow, Mr. Larry. Then she was gone, swallowed by the river of people heading to places they belonged. Larry sat motionless for a long moment, the container warm in his hands. Then, for the first time in months, maybe longer, maybe since before the accident, before the foreclosure, before everything broke, he cried. Silent tears tracked through the dust on his face, and he didn't wipe them away. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too much. When he finally opened the container, the eggs were cold. He ate every bite. They were the best thing he'd tasted in a year, seasoned with something he'd forgotten existed. Someone had said his name. Someone had seen him. Someone had sat beside him without flinching away. The sun climbed higher over Atlanta's gleaming towers, and Larry Macdonald, invisible man, sat holding an empty margarine container and remembering what it felt to be human. Nicole returned the next morning at exactly 7:43, as if the universe had contracted around this new constant. She carried a peanut butter sandwich in a Ziploc bag and an apple cut into slices, each piece wrapped in a paper towel to keep them from browning. Larry had been awake since 4, but this time he'd done something different. He'd used more soap in the library bathroom, had run water through his hair, had tried to make himself look less like the thing that scared children in their parents' warnings. Good morning, Mr. Larry, Nicole said, settling onto the cardboard beside him with the ease of someone claiming their usual seat. I brought peanut butter today because we ran out of eggs. Is that okay? It's crunchy, not creamy. Creamy is boring. Larry accepted the sandwich with hands that trembled slightly. Crunchy's fine. Thank you. You're welcome. She bit into her own sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. Do you like stories? Ms. Rodriguez is reading us this book about a girl who finds a secret garden, and it's really good even though it's old. Like, from before even my mama was born. And just like that, the rhythm established itself. Every morning, 7:43 a.m., Nicole Zamora appeared at Larry's corner like clockwork, like proof that the universe occasionally kept its promises. She brought food, sometimes elaborate, sometimes simple. A container of fruit salad with a plastic spoon. 2 leftover pancakes wrapped in foil, still faintly warm. Once, a piece of chocolate birthday cake with blue frosting that she explained was from her friend Destiny's party at school. Destiny said I could take some home, and I did, but then I thought you might like it more than me because I already had 2 pieces. Through their conversations, Larry assembled the architecture of Nicole's life. She lived with her mother, Evelyn, in an apartment somewhere in southwest Atlanta. Nicole was vague about the exact location, and Larry never pressed. Evelyn worked night shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, the city's largest public hospital, where she'd been an ER nurse for 8 years. Nicole walked herself to school each morning, a responsibility she took seriously, describing her route in detail, how she had to cross at the light on Piedmont because her mama made her promise never to jaywalk. Mama works really hard, Nicole said one morning, watching the business people flow past. She comes home all tired and her feet hurt, but she always asks about my homework. She's saving up for us to maybe get a house one day, a real one with a yard. I told her I'd help by not asking for expensive stuff. Larry heard the things Nicole didn't say: the single mother stretched thin, the daughter who'd learned too young to measure her wants against someone else's exhaustion, the small family navigating Atlanta's unforgiving economics with dignity intact but margins razor thin. It made the breakfast offerings even more overwhelming. These weren't scraps from abundance. This was sacrifice wrapped in Ziploc bags. He started preparing for her arrivals, washing more carefully in the library bathroom, smoothing his graying hair with water, positioning himself so he was sitting upright when she appeared. The first time he smiled at something, she said a story about Sandwich the six-toed cat getting stuck behind the refrigerator. Nicole had lit up like he'd given her something precious. "You should smile more, Mr. Larry," she said. "You look nice when you smile." No one had told him he looked nice and longer than he could calculate. By the second week, Nicole started bringing books. Paperbacks from her school library with plastic protective covers and checkout cards in the back. "This one's my favorite," she announced, handing him a worn copy of a fantasy novel about kids who discovered a magical world. "You can borrow it. I already read it 3 times. Larry hadn't read a book since before the accident. He'd forgotten that words on a page could build worlds, could offer escape from the 6-foot square of cardboard that had become his entire universe. He read during the long afternoons when foot traffic slowed, when the November sun offered weak warmth, losing himself in stories about people whose problems could be solved with magic and courage. When Nicole returned the next morning, Larry was ready. "I finished chapter 7, he told her. "The part where they find the hidden door." Her face transformed with delight. "Isn't it good? Wait until you get to chapter 12. That's when everything changes." He told her stories in return, carefully edited versions of his life before. About serving in the army, stationed in Germany, eating schnitzel for the first time, and thinking it was the strangest food he'd ever encountered. About building Atlanta, how the city had changed over 30 years, how he'd worked on structures she passed every day. He showed her how to identify different types of architectural support, pointing out buildings visible from their corner. "You made those?" Nicole asked, awe in her voice. "Helped make them," Larry corrected. "It takes a lot of people to raise a building. But yeah, I was part of it." "That's so cool. I want to build things when I grow up. Important things." "You will," Larry said, and meant it. But on the morning of the 13th day, everything shattered. Nicole appeared at 7:43 as usual, but before she could sit down, before she could pull the morning's offering from her backpack, a woman's voice cut through the street noise like a knife. Nicole Imani Zamora. A black woman in navy blue scrubs was striding toward them, her face carved from fury and fear. She was maybe 40, with Nicole's same dark eyes, but where Nicole's held openness, this woman's held judgment that had already reached its verdict. Evelyn Zamora had clearly followed her daughter, and the scene she'd discovered confirmed her worst nightmares. Nicole spun around. "Mama, I thought you were sleeping. Get away from him. Now." Evelyn grabbed Nicole's arm, pulling her backward with force that made the girl stumble. Larry stood up too quickly, his hips screaming protest, hands raised in a gesture that was half surrender, half plea. "Ma'am, it's not. Don't you talk to me." Evelyn's voice shook with rage that barely masked terror. "Don't you say one goddamn word. Nicole, get behind me right now." "But Mama, he's my friend." "He is not your friend. He's a grown man, and you are 10 years old, baby. Do you understand what?" Evelyn's voice cracked. She pulled Nicole close, wrapping her arms around her daughter like a human shield. "Stay away from my daughter. Don't talk to her, don't look at her, don't even think about her. If I see you near her again, I'm calling the police. Do you understand me?" The assumption behind the threat hit Larry like a physical blow. He saw himself through her eyes, the homeless man, the stranger, the predator. Every parent's nightmare disguised as kindness, grooming a child with food and attention. The fact that he'd never had a single inappropriate thought about Nicole didn't matter. The fact that she'd approached him first didn't matter. What mattered was what he looked like, what he represented, the statistical nightmare that probably kept this woman awake during her night shifts. "I understand," Larry managed, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. Mama, you don't understand. Mr. Larry is nice. He tells me stories, and we're going home. Now." Evelyn was already walking, pulling Nicole with her, the girl twisting to look back over her shoulder with confusion and betrayal written across her face. Larry sank back onto his cardboard, something inside him crumbling. He understood Evelyn's reaction. If he'd had a daughter, if Rachel had been 10 and approached a homeless stranger, he would have reacted exactly the same way. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. For 13 days, he'd remembered what it felt like to be human, to be someone worth talking to. Now he was a threat again. A problem. A monster in waiting. The next morning, Nicole appeared at 7:43. She had a container of oatmeal with raisins, steam escaping from the edge. "Mr. Larry," she started. "No." Larry didn't look at her. "Your mama's right. You should go." "But—" "Go to school, Nicole." He heard her confusion, her hurt. "Did I do something wrong?" That almost broke him. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. But your mama's scared, and she's right to be scared. You can't trust people like me. You should go." "People like you?" Nicole's voice hardened with anger he hadn't heard before. "You mean people who are nice to me? People who listen when I talk? I mean people on the street. Homeless people. Where we're not safe. That's stupid." She set the oatmeal container down on his cardboard with more force than necessary. "You're the safest person I know." But she left, and Larry let the oatmeal go cold, unable to eat it. The gift felt different now, contaminated by Evelyn's fear, by the truth of what his presence in Nicole's life represented to the rest of the world. Things got worse. Krantz, the security guard for the office building adjacent to Larry's corner, escalated his harassment. Krantz was maybe 35, built like someone who'd failed the police academy physical but still wanted the authority. He'd hassled Larry before, told him to move along, made comments about clearing up the trash, but he'd always stopped short of actual force. Not anymore. "This is a business district, not a homeless hotel," Krantz announced one afternoon, standing over Larry with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Got complaints from 3 different businesses about you. You're bad for tourism. Bad for business." "I'm not bothering anyone," Larry said quietly. "You're bothering everyone just by existing here." Krantz kicked Larry's backpack, sending it skidding across the sidewalk. "You got until tomorrow morning to find somewhere else to set up your little camp. Otherwise, I'm calling it in. Loitering, trespassing, whatever I can make stick." A small crowd had gathered, tourists with cameras, business people on lunch break. No one intervened. A few took photos, likely to post on social media with captions about how Atlanta needed to do something about homelessness. Larry gathered his backpack with shaking hands, checking to make sure Rachel's old belongings hadn't spilled out. Everything was still there, but he felt the sidewalk shrinking beneath him, his small piece of claimed space becoming contested territory. That night, rain moved in. Larry huddled under the closed cafe's overhang, his cardboard soaked through, his hip aching from the cold and damp. Nicole didn't come the next morning, or the morning after that. Larry told himself it was better this way, safer for her, the right thing. But at 7:43 a.m., he still looked up, still felt the absence like a physical wound, still remembered what it had been like for 13 days to be somebody's friend instead of everybody's fear. The river of people flowed past, indifferent as always, and Larry Macdonald folded back into invisibility, where people like him belonged. Nicole returned on the 5th day, but this time at 6:45 a.m., a full hour earlier than usual. The streets were quieter, the morning commute still building, the sun barely cresting the buildings. Larry was awake, he was always awake, but surprised enough that he sat up straighter, looking past her for the woman who would surely follow. "Mama's still asleep," Nicole said, reading his expression. "She worked a double shift and didn't get home until 4. She sleeps hard after doubles." "You shouldn't be here," Larry said, but there was less conviction in his voice than there should have been. 5 days without her had been 5 days of silence that pressed against his chest like physical weight. "Well, I am here." Nicole knelt beside him, pulling items from her backpack with the efficiency of someone on a mission. Band-Aids, a tube of antibacterial ointment, alcohol wipes in individual packets. "Give me your hand." "What?" "Your hand, Mr. Larry. The one with the cut." Larry looked down at his right hand, at the gash across his palm that had been there for over a week. He'd gotten it reaching into a dumpster for cardboard, caught it on a piece of exposed metal. It had scabbed over, but the edges were red and angry, infection settling in the way it did when you couldn't keep wounds clean, when your immune system was compromised by malnutrition and exposure. "It's fine," he said automatically. "It's not fine. It's infected, and it's going to get worse." Nicole grabbed his hand with a firmness that reminded him achingly of Evelyn's voice, that maternal certainty that brooked no argument. "You need to take care of this." She cleaned the wound with alcohol wipes first, her small fingers gentle but thorough. Larry hissed at the sting. "Sorry," Nicole murmured, but she didn't stop. She applied the antibacterial ointment with a careful touch, then wrapped the hand in gauze she'd clearly stolen from her mother's medical supplies. The whole procedure took maybe 5 minutes. but it was the most care anyone had shown Larry's physical body in longer than he could remember. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "Mama. She practices on me sometimes when she's studying new techniques. Says I'm a good patient because I hold still." Nicole packed the supplies back into her bag. "You have to change the bandage every day and keep it clean. I brought extra stuff. It's in the side pocket. Your mama's going to notice these are missing." "Probably." Nicole shrugged with the peculiar fearlessness of children who'd already decided consequences were worth it. "She's mad at me anyway. What's a little matter?" They sat in the early morning quiet, the city slowly waking around them. Nicole had brought a granola bar and an orange, which she peeled methodically, handing him half the sections. The intimacy of the gesture, the assumption that they would share breakfast, made Larry's throat tight. "Mr. Larry," Nicole said after a while, her voice careful in the way that meant she was approaching something important. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you have kids?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through memories Larry had tried to keep submerged. He was quiet for so long that Nicole started to apologize, but he shook his head. "I had a daughter." "Have a daughter?" "Rachel. She's 28 now. Lives in Savannah." "Do you talk to her?" "No. Not for 3 years." "Why not?" "Because I'm ashamed," Larry said, the truth coming easier than he'd expected. "Because I was supposed to protect her. Provide for her. That's what fathers do. And I couldn't do that. I lost everything: the house she grew up in, the life she knew. What kind of man can't even keep a roof over his family's head?" Nicole considered this with the seriousness she brought to difficult math problems. "Did you lose it on purpose?" "No, but..." "Did you try to keep it?" "Yes, but that doesn't." "Did you stop loving her?" "Never." The word came out fierce, definitive. "Not for 1 second." "Then tell her that," Nicole said with the kind of clarity that only children possess, the ability to cut through complexity to the essential truth underneath. "That's what matters. My friend Destiny's dad left, and nobody knows where he is. And Destiny says the worst part isn't that he's gone. It's that she doesn't know if he still loves her." "But you do love Rachel. So tell her." "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not?" "You pick up a phone and say, 'Rachel, I'm your daddy, and I love you, and I'm sorry.' That seems pretty simple to me." Larry laughed, a sound that was half sob. "You make everything sound so easy." "That's because grown-ups make everything so complicated." Nicole stood, brushing orange peel residue from her hands. "I have to go. School starts in 45 minutes, and I still have to walk there." She shouldered her backpack, then turned back. "Think about what I said, okay? About Rachel." "Okay," Larry promised, and watched her disappear into the growing crowd. What Nicole didn't know, what Larry couldn't tell her, was that Evelyn Zamora was watching. Had been watching for 3 days now, positioning herself across the street, behind parked cars, in coffee shop doorways. She'd worked the system, asked colleagues at Grady about Larry Macdonald, checked the registered sex offender databases with her heart hammering, half expecting to find his face staring back at her. But there was nothing. No criminal record beyond a decades-old DUI. No red flags. Just a man who'd served his country, built buildings, and then fallen through the cracks that America pretended didn't exist. She watched the way he kept space between himself and Nicole, the way he never touched her except when she grabbed his hand to bandage it. And even then he looked uncomfortable, aware of how it might appear. She saw him redirect another homeless man one morning, a younger guy, strung out and unpredictable, who'd approached Nicole asking for money. Larry had positioned himself between them with surprising speed despite his bad hip, his voice low but firm. "Leave the kid alone. Move on." The protective instinct was unmistakable. Evelyn's fear didn't vanish. Fear for your child never did. But it complicated, folded in on itself, made room for other possibilities. What if he really was just lonely? What if Nicole had recognized something in him that Evelyn's exhausted, defensive paranoia had missed? What if kindness could exist without ulterior motive, even in the most unlikely circumstances? She didn't approach them. Not yet. But she stopped pulling Nicole away quite so hard when they argued about it at home. October surrendered to November, and with it came the first real cold. Atlanta's weather had been mild, clinging to fall's remnants, but November arrived with teeth. Temperatures dropped into the 40s at night, the 30s by the end of the month. Larry's cough started as a tickle, an annoyance he could suppress. But it deepened, became wetter, settled in his chest like water in a basement. He tried to hide it from Nicole, turning away when the coughing fits hit, muffling them in the crook of his elbow. But Nicole noticed everything. "That doesn't sound good," she said one morning, her brow furrowed with concern that looked too old for her face. "It's just a cold. Happens every winter. You need medicine. And you should see a doctor." "Can't afford a doctor, sweetheart. There's free clinics." "Mama says Grady has free clinics for—" She stopped, looking embarrassed. "For people like me," Larry finished gently. "It's okay. You can say it." He'd tried the free clinics. The wait times were measured in hours, sometimes days for non-emergency care. You needed ID to register, documentation he'd lost when his belongings were stolen from the shelter. The bureaucracy of poverty was a maze designed by people who'd never had to navigate it, full of dead ends and impossible prerequisites. You needed an address to get ID. You needed ID to get housing. You needed housing to get a job. You needed a job to afford housing. The circle was perfect and unbreakable. Nicole started bringing extra supplies: cough drops she'd bought with her own allowance, a scarf she said she'd outgrown, but Larry suspected she'd stolen from her mother's closet. When he protested, she fixed him with a look that was pure Evelyn. "Just take them, Mr. Larry. Don't be stubborn." At school, the other kids had started noticing Nicole's morning routine. Some were curious, asking her about that homeless guy she talked to. She told them about Larry's stories, about building Atlanta, about the army. "He's nice," she insisted. "He's just having a hard time right now." But some kids were cruel in the way that children learn from adults, parroting prejudices they didn't understand but had absorbed like secondhand smoke. A boy named Marcus Whitley, whose father worked at one of the investment firms downtown, cornered Nicole at lunch one day. "My dad says homeless people are just lazy drug addicts who don't want to work," Marcus announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "He says they should get jobs instead of begging. He says they're ruining Atlanta." Nicole's hands clenched around her milk carton. "Your dad's wrong. My dad makes $400,000 a year. I don't think he's wrong. Making money doesn't mean you're smart. It just means you're lucky." Nicole's voice was rising, drawing attention. "Mr. Larry worked his whole life building this city. He got hurt, and nobody helped him. That's not lazy. That's just sad. He's probably lying to you. They all lie. My dad says." Nicole threw her milk carton. It wasn't a good throw, she wasn't aiming, just reacting, but it hit Marcus square in the chest, exploding on impact, soaking his expensive polo shirt in chocolate milk. The cafeteria went silent, then erupted in chaos. Ms. Rodriguez sent Nicole to the principal's office. Her mother was called. Detention was assigned 3 days of sitting in a classroom after school while other kids went home. Nicole sat through the principal's lecture about appropriate responses to conflict, about using words instead of actions, about representing King Elementary with dignity. She nodded in all the right places, signed the detention slip with her neatest handwriting. But when her mother picked her up, exhausted from another night's shift, eyes bloodshot and worried, Nicole met her gaze with zero regret. "I'd do it again," she said simply. Someone had to stand up for him. Evelyn looked at her daughter, this fierce, impossibly brave child she'd somehow raised, and felt something crack open in her chest. Fear, yes, but also pride, also recognition, also the uncomfortable awareness that Nicole had inherited her mother's inability to look away from suffering, her compulsion to act when everyone else was content to pass by. "We need to talk," Evelyn said quietly. "About Mr. Larry. About everything." Nicole nodded. "Okay, Mama." That night, sitting at their small kitchen table with tea cooling in mismatched mugs, they began the difficult conversation. Evelyn didn't pretend her fears away. Nicole didn't back down from her conviction. They met somewhere in the middle, in that complicated space where love and caution intersect, where a mother's protective instinct makes room for a daughter's moral clarity. Outside, November's cold deepened. Larry's cough worsened, wet and rattling. The bandage on his hand, changed daily with Nicole's stolen supplies, was the only thing that kept the infection from spreading. And somewhere in Savannah, Rachel Macdonald went about her life, unaware that her father was alive, homeless, and loved by a 10-year-old girl who believed that everyone deserved breakfast and dignity in equal measure. The bridges between people are built from small moments of defiance, from stolen medical supplies and thrown milk cartons, from conversations that complicate our comfortable judgments. Nicole was building one such bridge, board by stubborn board, refusing to accept that some people were meant to be invisible. even when the winter promised to test whether such bridges could hold. December arrived in Atlanta like an unwelcome verdict, bringing cold that had no business in Georgia. The temperatures plummeted into the 20s at night, and the city, built for humidity and heat, for summers that stretched into October, reacted with shock paralysis. People bundled in coats they only wore twice a year, complained about frozen pipes, stayed indoors. For Larry Macdonald, huddled under the cafe overhang with cardboard and a thin blanket Nicole had brought, December felt like the world had decided he'd lived long enough. The cough that had started as an annoyance in November was now pneumonia. Larry knew it, even without a doctor's diagnosis. The wet rattled deep in his chest, the way breathing felt like inhaling broken glass, the fever that came in waves, making him shiver violently one moment and sweat through his clothes the next. He'd had pneumonia once before, years ago when he'd still had health insurance and a warm bed. This wasn't the same. This was pneumonia with nowhere to recover, with no antibiotics, with a body already depleted by months of malnutrition and exposure. "You need to go to a shelter," Nicole said one morning, her voice tight with worry. She'd arrived at 6:30, earlier than usual, with oatmeal that Larry couldn't eat. His stomach rebelled against everything now. "It's too cold out here, Mr. Larry. You're getting sicker. Can't do shelters." Larry's voice was a rasp, each word requiring effort. "Why not? They're warm. They have beds. They have. I know what they have." He closed his eyes, remembering. The shelter on Joseph E. Lowry Boulevard, the night 6 months ago when he'd finally been desperate enough to try. He'd been asleep when the theft happened. Someone had taken his shoes right off his feet, taken the backpack he'd been using as a pillow. Inside that backpack, Rachel's photo from her college graduation, the only picture he had left of her. Smiling in her cap and gown, holding her diploma, looking at the camera with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. When he'd woken up and realized it was gone, he'd searched every corner of that shelter, gotten into a fight with another man he'd accused. Security had thrown them both out. Later that same night, he'd watched a man 3 cots down from where he'd been sleeping get beaten over a disagreement about a blanket. The sounds, the wet thud of fists on flesh, the victim's pleading, the institutional indifference of the overwhelmed staff, still woke Larry sometimes. The street was dangerous, but at least on the street, you could see danger coming. At least outside, you could run. "Bad things happen in shelters," he told Nicole. "I'm better out here." But he wasn't better out here. They both knew it. Nicole went home that day and did something she'd been avoiding. She told her mother everything. Not just about the breakfast visits or the bandaged hand, but about Rachel and Savannah, about Larry's construction work and his army service, about the scaffolding accident that had started his descent. She told Evelyn about his gentleness, his stories, the way he edited his life before for appropriate audiences, protecting a 10-year-old from the full weight of how the world breaks people. "He's dying, Mama," Nicole said, and her voice cracked on the word. "I can see it. Every day he's a little worse. Please, we have to help him." Evelyn Zamora sat at their kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold while Nicole talked. She was exhausted from another night shift, her scrubs still smelling of antiseptic and other people's emergencies. In the ER, she saw people like Larry all the time, homeless patients who showed up in crisis, got stabilized, got discharged back to the streets because there was nowhere else for them to go. The system wasn't designed to save them. It was designed to maintain them at the bare minimum of alive until they finally weren't. She'd been watching Larry for weeks now, her protective surveillance gradually transforming into something else. Recognition, maybe. An understanding that he was as trapped by circumstance as she was, just at a different point on the spectrum of precarity. One bad month, one unexpected medical bill, one lost job, and the distance between them wasn't as vast as comfort would suggest. "I'll make some calls," Evelyn said finally. "But baby, I need you to understand something. The system moves slow, and sometimes it doesn't move at all." She tried. God knows she tried. Evelyn called social services, explained Larry's situation, navigated the bureaucratic maze with the persistence of someone who'd learned to advocate in a profession that demanded it. But every path led to a dead end. Larry needed ID to access services. He needed a birth certificate to get ID. He needed money to get a birth certificate. He had no social security card, no medical records they could easily access, no proof of his veteran status without documentation he didn't have. The system required you to prove you existed before it would help you survive. It could take weeks, the social worker told Evelyn. Maybe months. We're understaffed and the holidays slow everything down. Keep him warm. Tell him to go to the ER if it gets critical. Keep him warm. As if warm was something you could command into existence. As if critical wasn't already here. Meanwhile, downtown Atlanta's business owners were organizing. A petition circulated among the Peachtree Street merchants, signed by the cafe owner, the office building manager, the boutique that sold $1,000 handbags, the restaurant that served $30 salads. The language was careful, avoiding overt cruelty, speaking instead about public health concerns and maintaining the district's reputation and safety for tourists and residents. But the message was clear: make the homeless go somewhere else. We don't care where. Just not here. Krantz, the security guard, received the petition like a permission slip for his worst impulses. He'd been harassing Larry for weeks, but the business owner's formal complaint empowered him, gave his cruelty an official stamp. He started making rounds twice a day, telling Larry to move along, threatening arrest, kicking at the cardboard when he thought no one was watching. Then came the night everything Larry had left was taken. It was a Tuesday, around 9 p.m., the street mostly empty. Larry had been coughing so hard he'd vomited. Not that there was much to bring up, and he'd barely noticed Krantz approaching until the man was standing over him. Told you to move along, Krantz said. Told you multiple times. You don't listen. Please, Larry managed between coughs. I'm sick. I just need. You need to not be here. Krantz grabbed Larry's backpack, the one that had belonged to Rachel, that carried everything Larry still owned. He grabbed the blanket Nicole had brought. He grabbed the cardboard sheets, the plastic bags containing spare clothes, the small stack of library books Nicole had loaned him. No weight. Larry tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate, the fever and weakness pinning him down. Krantz carried everything to the dumpster behind the building. Larry heard the trash compactor start up, heard the mechanical grinding that meant his possessions, including the jacket Nicole had stolen from her mother's closet, the warmest thing he'd had, were being destroyed. He sat on the bare sidewalk and felt something inside him finally break. Not his body, though that was failing too. Something deeper. The last small reserve of fight that had kept him getting up each morning, that had made him wash his face and smooth his hair at 6 a.m. for a 10-year-old girl who believed he mattered. That reserve was empty now, completely spent. December's coldest night was forecast for that Friday. The meteorologists showed their maps with grim fascination, an Arctic front diving south, bringing temperatures Atlanta hadn't seen in a decade. Teens overnight. Possible single digits by dawn. Freezing rain before midnight, coating everything in ice. Nicole watched the weather report with mounting panic. Her mother was already at work, wouldn't be home until 7 a.m. Nicole tried calling, but Evelyn was with a patient. She left a voicemail that failed to capture her terror. Mama, it's Nicole. The weather, Mr. Larry's really sick. Call me back. By 10 p.m., when Evelyn still hadn't called back, Nicole made a decision. She put on her winter coat over her pajamas, grabbed her house key, and left their apartment. The bus routes were already shutting down for the weather, but she knew how to walk. It was 3 miles to Larry's corner. She'd walked farther on Saturday mornings with her mother. The freezing rain had started, making the sidewalks treacherous. Nicole's sneakers weren't made for this, and she slipped twice, catching herself on parked cars. The temperature was dropping fast, her breath visible in the streetlights, the city unusually quiet as people sheltered inside. She reached Larry's corner at 11:15 and found him slumped against the brick wall, eyes closed, his skin gray in the dim light. No blanket, no cardboard, no jacket, just Larry in his thin flannel shirt, ice forming on his shoulders, his chest barely moving. Mr. Larry? Nicole's voice was small, frightened. She shook his shoulder. Mr. Larry, wake up. He didn't respond. His skin was cold, too cold, and his lips had a blue tinge that Nicole knew from her mother's medical textbooks meant something terrible. Hypothermia. Frostbite. Death. Nicole screamed. Not a word, just a sound. Pure terror channeled through a child's lungs, cutting through the frozen night. She screamed again, louder, desperate, her hands on Larry's face, trying to warm him, trying to wake him, trying to undo the cold that had its grip on him. Help. The word finally formed. Someone help. Please. He's dying. Please. The street was mostly empty, but her screams carried. A window opened in an apartment building across the way. A couple leaving a late movie 3 blocks down heard and started running. And then, impossibly, Krantz, who was doing his late-night rounds, heard the commotion and came around the corner. He saw the little girl in her winter coat over pajamas, crying and screaming over the homeless man he'd harassed, and something in his face changed. Even he couldn't look away from this. Even he couldn't pretend this was someone else's problem. Call 911. Krantz barked at the couple who'd arrived. He was already pulling off his own jacket, wrapping it around Larry's shoulders, checking for a pulse. Now, Nicole's hands were shaking too hard to work her mother's phone number. Krantz took the phone from her, found Mama in her contacts, pressed call. When Evelyn answered, professionally, expecting a patient update, Krantz's voice was tight. Your daughter's on Peachtree Street at the old cafe. She found her homeless friend. He's hypothermic, possible pneumonia, needs immediate transport. She's okay, but you need to get here. More people gathered. Someone brought a blanket from their car. Someone else had called 911. In the distance, sirens approached, mixing with the sound of Nicole's crying and Larry's faint, rattling breath. Stay with me, Nicole whispered, her small hands on Larry's cold face. Please stay with me, Mr. Larry. Please don't leave. I still have so many things to tell you. About school and sandwich and everything. You have to call Rachel. Remember? You promised you'd think about it. You can't leave before you call Rachel. The ambulance arrived in a wash of red and white lights, paramedics moving with practiced efficiency. They started in 4, wrapped Larry in warming blankets, checked vitals that made them exchange worried glances. The pneumonia had filled his lungs with fluid. His core temperature was 89 degrees, dangerously hypothermic. His organs were shutting down, his body finally surrendering to months of exposure and neglect. Is he going to die? Nicole asked one of the paramedics, her voice small and broken. The paramedic looked at this child who'd somehow found him in time, who'd screamed loud enough to be heard, who'd refused to let him disappear into the cold. We're going to try really hard to make sure he doesn't, she said gently. They loaded Larry into the ambulance. Nicole tried to climb in after him, but Krantz, still holding her gently by the shoulders, stopped her. They need room to work, kiddo. Then Evelyn arrived, having abandoned her shift and run 6 blocks from Grady Memorial, and Nicole collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. I found him, Mama. I found him, and he's so cold. He's so cold, and I think he's dying. You saved him, baby, Evelyn whispered into her daughter's hair, watching the ambulance pull away, lights flashing against the frozen streets. You found him in time. That's what matters. But standing there in the freezing rain, holding her shaking daughter, watching the ambulance disappear toward Grady Memorial, Evelyn wasn't entirely sure that was true. Finding someone in time only mattered if the system that had failed them so completely could somehow still save them. The coldest night of winter pressed down on Atlanta, and somewhere in that ambulance, Larry Macdonald's life hung in the balance, sustained by machines and medication and the stubborn refusal of a 10-year-old girl to let him be invisible. The Grady Memorial ER on a Friday night was controlled chaos: gunshot wounds from the west side, car accidents from icy roads, heart attacks and strokes and overdoses, the uninsured and the desperate flowing through doors that never closed. Evelyn knew every corner of this place, every shortcut and protocol, every doctor who owed her a favor, and every nurse who'd cover her shift. She used all of it now. 60-year-old male, severe hypothermia, core temp 89 degrees, pneumonia, possible sepsis, the paramedic rattled off as they wheeled Larry through. Found unconscious on the street. No ID, no insurance information. I know him, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the noise with the authority of 8 years in this ER. Larry Macdonald. Veteran. Construction worker. He's got a daughter in Savannah. And he's not dying on my watch. She pulled Dr. Chun, the attending physician who'd mentored her through her first year, who she'd covered for during his divorce. She called in favors from radiology, from pharmacy, from the social worker on duty. Larry was moved to a treatment room usually reserved for insured patients, hooked up to warming blankets and 4 antibiotics, his vitals monitored with equipment that made soft beeping sounds that meant life was still present, still fighting. Nicole sat in the waiting room, still in her winter coat over her pajamas, her sneakers leaving wet prints on the linoleum. She was shaking, but not from cold, from the aftershock of terror, from the image of Larry's blue lips and gray skin, from the understanding that had crashed into her on that frozen street. Death was real, and it came for people you loved, and sometimes all the breakfast sandwiches and good intentions in the world weren't enough. Krantz sat 3 seats away, still in his security guard uniform, his own jacket somewhere with Larry. He kept looking at Nicole, then looking away, as if he couldn't quite process what had happened, what he'd almost allowed to happen through indifference and cruelty elevated to policy. The businessman from the restaurant, the couple from the movies, the taxi driver who'd stopped, they'd all dispersed once the ambulance left, but their presence had mattered. For 10 minutes on a frozen Atlanta street, the river of indifferent people had stopped flowing. They'd gathered around a dying homeless man and a terrified child, and they'd witnessed. They'd cared. It wasn't enough to fix the systems that had failed Larry, but it was enough to save his life that night. Hours passed with the elastic quality of hospital time, simultaneously crawling and racing. Evelyn came out periodically with updates. His temperature's coming up. That's good. Then later, the pneumonia's bad. Both lungs. We're hitting it hard with antibiotics. Then, near dawn, he's stable. He's going to make it. Nicole cried then, the relief as overwhelming as the fear had been. She fell asleep in her mother's arms in a waiting room chair, finally surrendering to exhaustion. Larry survived, but survival was just the beginning. The pneumonia had ravaged his lungs. The hypothermia had damaged his extremities, minor frostbite on his fingers and toes that would heal, but reminded everyone how close he'd come. The malnutrition, the months of exposure, the untreated infections. His body was a catalog of systemic failure, of what happens when we decide some people aren't worth the cost of basic dignity. Evelyn fought the hospital administration about billing with the ferocity of someone who understood exactly how the system worked and where its pressure points were. She connected Larry with social workers who could navigate the bureaucracy, who knew which forms could be expedited, which rules had exceptions. She called the VA, invoked Larry's service record, demanded they honor commitments made to soldiers decades ago. And during his delirium, when the fever raged and his mind wandered through memories both real and imagined, Larry called out for Rachel. Over and over. Rachel, I'm sorry. Rachel, please. I'm so sorry, baby girl. I tried so hard. Nicole heard him from the doorway one morning, and something in her face hardened with determination. She asked her mother's permission, and when Evelyn hesitated, Nicole simply said, "He needs her, Mama. And maybe she needs him too." The search took 3 days. Nicole enlisted Ms. Rodriguez, her 5th-grade teacher, who helped her navigate social media in the school library computer lab. They found a Rachel Macdonald in Savannah, Georgia, age 28, middle school science teacher, married, name Diaz. Profile picture showing a woman with Larry's stubborn chin and her mother's eyes, holding a toddler with wild curls. That's her, Nicole whispered, certain in the way you can be when something clicks into place. Getting the phone number required creativity. Ms. Rodriguez contacted the school where Rachel taught, explained it was a family emergency, without providing details that would violate privacy. Rachel called back within an hour, her voice wary. "This is Rachel Diaz. Someone said there was an emergency involving my family." Evelyn took the phone, professional and direct. "Mrs. Diaz, this is Evelyn Zamora. I'm a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Your father, Larry Macdonald, is here. He was found on the street, hypothermic and severely ill. He's stable now, but during his delirium, he called for you repeatedly. I think you should know." The silence on the line stretched long enough that Evelyn thought the call had dropped. Then Rachel's voice, tight with emotion. "My father is homeless?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know exactly. At least a year, maybe longer." Another silence. Then, "I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. He just disappeared. Stopped answering calls. I thought he didn't want contact. That he was ashamed of how things ended with Mom." "He is ashamed," Evelyn said gently. "That's exactly why he didn't call. But Mrs. Diaz, shame doesn't mean he stopped loving you. It means he loved you enough to think you were better off without him. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "It is." Rachel came 2 days later, driving up from Savannah in her practical Honda, leaving her husband and daughter at home because she didn't know what she was walking into. Didn't know if she could handle her father meeting his granddaughter in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and defeat. The reunion was nothing like the movies. There was no swelling music, no tearful embrace that erased years of hurt. Rachel stood in the doorway of Larry's room, and Larry, awake now, lucid but weak, looked at his daughter and saw the woman she'd become without him. Saw her wedding ring, her professional clothes, the life she'd built in his absence. "Hi, Dad," Rachel said, and her voice was flat, guarded, carrying 3 years of unanswered calls and birthday cards returned as undeliverable. "Rachel." Larry's voice cracked. "You shouldn't have come." "Probably not." She stepped into the room but didn't approach the bed. "You look terrible." "I am terrible." "Don't." Rachel's composure cracked, anger bleeding through. "Don't make this about your self-pity. You abandoned us. You lost the house, you lost your marriage, and then you lost yourself, and you never once thought maybe I deserved to know where you were? Maybe I was worried? Maybe I needed my father even if he was broke and homeless? I was ashamed. I know you were ashamed. I know. But I needed you. And you decided your shame was more important than me." Nicole, watching from the doorway with her mother, saw Larry's face crumble. Saw Rachel crying angry tears she'd probably been holding for 3 years. This wasn't healing. This was the wound being opened so it could finally be cleaned. "You're right," Larry said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I was selfish. I thought I was protecting you from my failure, but I was really just protecting myself from facing it. From facing you." Rachel wiped her eyes roughly. "You have a granddaughter, Emma. She's 3. She asks about grandparents sometimes, and I have to tell her that Grandpa Larry is somewhere, that we don't see him." The information hit Larry like a physical blow. A granddaughter, 3 years old. A whole person who existed because his daughter had built a life, had found love, had created something beautiful while he'd been disappearing into the streets. "Can I?" His voice broke. "Can I meet her? Someday?" "I don't know," Rachel said honestly. "I don't know if I can trust you not to disappear again. I don't know if you're going to get better or if this is just a temporary stop before you're back on the street. I don't know anything except that I'm angry and sad and I missed you and I hate that I missed you." "That's fair." They talked for an hour, not healing exactly, but starting. Rachel told him about her teaching job, about her husband Miguel who worked in IT, about Emma's obsession with dinosaurs. Larry told her about the accident, about the foreclosure, about the slow collapse that he'd hidden from her because he couldn't bear for her to see his failure. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just acknowledgement. Just 2 people beginning the painful process of rebuilding something that had been broken. When Rachel left, she didn't hug her father. But she said, "I'll call next week. We'll talk more." And that was something. That was a beginning. 2 months later, Larry Macdonald stood on a downtown Atlanta corner in clean clothes from the donation center attached to his transitional housing facility. The housing wasn't permanent, nothing in his life felt permanent yet, but it was warm and safe, with a bed that didn't require being folded up before dawn, with a bathroom that had hot water and privacy, with a counselor who helped him navigate both PTSD and the medical debt that was being slowly managed through social services. He wasn't holding a sign that begged. He was holding flyers for a winter shelter drive, for a homeless advocacy organization that told stories to policymakers, that pushed for changes in zoning laws and funding for mental health services and protections for people like him. "Ask me how your voice can change policy for Atlanta's homeless," his new sign read. Most people still walked past. The river of indifference still flowed that hadn't changed. But some people stopped. Some took flyers. Some asked questions. And Larry, who'd once been invisible, who'd once believed he deserved invisibility, looked them in the eye and answered. Nicole stood beside him, handing out flyers with the same determination she brought to everything. Evelyn watched from across the street, arms crossed but smiling, keeping her protective distance but no longer trying to pull her daughter away from this work, this witness, this stubborn insistence that everyone mattered. A businessman in an expensive suit approached, looking like he might brush past them. Nicole stepped into his path, not aggressively, just confidently, and held out a flyer. "Everyone matters," she said with absolute certainty. "Everyone." The businessman paused. He looked at Nicole, then at Larry, then at the flyer. He could have kept walking. Most people did. But something in Nicole's voice, or Larry's direct gaze, or the simple truth of the statement made him stop. He took the flyer. "What's this about?" Larry spoke, and his voice was steady. "It's about changing a system that treats people like me as problems instead of people. It's about how close I came to dying on this street because being homeless had made me invisible. It's about policy changes that could save lives." "What kind of policy changes?" And they talked. The businessman listened. He asked intelligent questions. He took out his phone and photographed the organization's website. He didn't promise anything, didn't write a check or pledge support, but he engaged. He saw Larry as a person with knowledge worth hearing, with experiences worth considering. When he left, another person was already approaching. Then another. The river still flowed, but there were islands, now small moments of resistance where people stopped, where they chose to see instead of look away. Larry's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Rachel. Emma wants to FaceTime with Grandpa Larry. Are you free Sunday at 2? He typed back with fingers that still ached from frostbite, but had healed enough to hold hope. I'm free. I'd love that. Nicole saw his smile and understood without asking. Some things couldn't be fixed with breakfast sandwiches. Some wounds took years to heal, required painful conversations, and rebuilt trust and the willingness to show up even when showing up was hard. But witnessing mattered. Caring mattered. The simple act of refusing to look away, of seeing someone, of saying their name, of bringing them breakfast at 7:43 in the morning, that mattered too. The February sun climbed higher over Atlanta's gleaming towers. The city moved around them, 10,000 people with places to be. But here on this corner, the river slowed. People stopped. People listened. People saw. And Larry Macdonald, who'd once been invisible, handed out flyers with steady hands and told his story to anyone who'd hear it, building bridges from broken pieces, making sure no one else had to disappear into the cold before someone noticed they were gone. Nicole handed another flyer to a woman rushing past. Everyone matters, she said again, because it was true, because someone had to keep saying it until enough people believed it. The woman stopped. She took the flyer. She asked a question. And in that small moment, that pause in the rushing river, something shifted. Not everything. Not nearly enough. But something. It was a beginning. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.